Hello everyone, this is Dr. Onur Arun, and today we are going to discuss about the period of enlightenment. This is one of the most influential period in human history in terms of not only approaching to the social issues, but also in terms of how to approach to the nature. This chapter, which is written in a significant detail, has three major aims. One of them is to discuss on the general features and the origins of political thought during the Age of Enlightenment. After discussing on this issue, the chapter turns its attention to three different streams within the Enlightenment tradition that are German, Scottish, and French Enlightenment. Lastly, it focuses on certain great figures of the Enlightenment period, whose contributions to the Enlightenment thought very, very important, who are Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Tocqueville. Okay, let's start with the first aim, which is general features and origins of the political thoughts during the Enlightenment period. We should first of all say that it is not quite easy to determine a precise date concerning when the Enlightenment period started and ended. However, we can crudely say that the 18th century is the period when the Enlightenment started. In this period, a new political understanding, which can be pointed out as the Enlightenment, has begun to rise in different parts of Europe. The notion of enlightenment has a reason-based understanding. In this period, a consensus on that all problems that humanity faces can be solved by actual or material reason has emerged. In contrast, there are differences between French, Scottish, and German Enlightenment traditions. In this context, it can be said that enlightenment doesn't represent a unified form of thought. In other words, it can be said that the period of enlightenment doesn't illustrate a period of one single unified perspective or understanding of what is the truth. The different Enlightenment associations have serious differences in terms of perspectives that they hold towards political, and social situations of the age. On the other hand, I'm sorry. On the other hand, if we aim to develop a more specific perspective concerning to the roots of the Enlightenment period, we can say that the origins of the idea of enlightenment can be found in the movement of Renaissance and reform. Through the Renaissance, a new understanding based on a positive positive mind has begun to emerge. At the same time, the idea of an independent individual came to the surface. With the Reformation period, we basically mean that the Catholic Church's dominion over societies and social relations, including political affairs and the economic exchange relations, has been lifted. This understanding led to the emergence of what we call the traditions of critical thinking. And the traditions of critical thinking has led to a critical approach towards existing political and social institutions, as well as economic modes of productions and the relations. When we look at the basic features of different traditions in the Enlightenment period, we particularly see French, Scottish, and German Enlightenment streams or traditions. The French Enlightenment thinkers, scholars of the French Enlightenment, aimed to build a political and social structure in which the role of reason is dominant in both understanding and analyzing the social and political life of society. They have rejected all sources of information that are beyond the reason, and scientific knowledge was the only reference for them. Therefore, in this tradition, the French Enlightenment, the anti-religion and anti-tradition streams were clearly dominant. They were intended to completely eradicate the influence of religion and tradition on society. The French Enlightenment aimed to remove all institutions belonging to the previous understanding of human life that was mainly based on the Christian theology in the medieval Europe. The Scottish Enlightenment and its understanding of human freedom that was mainly considered as political freedoms gave importance to economic freedoms. It's a great figure, namely David Hume, argued that the emergence of capitalism was a very important factor in the development of political freedoms. According to Hume, individuals who make independent decisions in economic terms also aspire to demonstrate the same situation in terms of political decisions. As the state's intervention in the economic field diminished, it began to interfere with people's freedom. Thus, when we look at the Scottish Enlightenment tradition, we can say that the Scottish Enlightenment advocated that the market economy should be strengthened. The German Enlightenment thinkers were opposed to the revolutionary change of the present political order. German Enlightenment and particularly Kant, Immanuel Kant, believed that social change could take place under the leadership of political power. Therefore, the German Enlightenment was most important representative of a certain ways of understanding that was allegedly called enlightened despotism. In other words, German Enlightenment thinkers thought that political power, if necessary, had to be implemented to transform the society. When we look at the great figures of Enlightenment period, we can address quite a number of different political and economic philosophers. However, among those philosophers, three figures are quite important in terms of their contributions to the political thought. Looking at the period of Enlightenment, we see that those figures who are quite important in terms of the political thought can be addressed as Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Alexis de Tocqueville. Montesquieu primarily emphasized the limitations of political power to protect human freedom of citizens. He argued that the state had three separate functions, which are legislative, executive, and judicial power. It's not possible for these powers of the state to be transferred to a structure outside the state itself. Therefore, it is necessary to limit the state to the state. According to Montesquieu, legislative, executive, and judicial functions must be gutted in different hands. This will prevent the use and abuse of the power, and this will prevent also collections of the power under the one man's control. According to Montesquieu, the principles of the separations of power is essential for the protections of political, economic, and social freedom of individuals. Jean-Jacques Rousseau emphasized the emergence of society and political power in his inspiring discussions on the idea of the theory of social contract. Besides, he also focused on establishing a political structure that protects citizens' freedoms in terms of political affairs, economic relations, and social relations. According to him, legitimate power is the outcome of the social contract. Rousseau was a person who influenced the French Revolution with his considerations concerning to the social contract and the inequality. He said that the sovereignty belongs to the people by the expressions of his concepts of general will. This understanding was quite influential in the birth of the idea of national sovereignty. On the other hand, Tocqueville was one of the first thinkers to contribute to the theory of the modern democracy. He argued that the democracy is the most effective form of the government, both for its own time and for the future, for our own time. Tocqueville has created his thesis on democracy with his observations in how the system works in America at that time. According to him, in a real democratic system, local governments must be strong. There should also be a civil society institutions. In addition to this, religious freedoms should be recognized. Tocqueville also pointed out that freedom of the press is important in democracies in order to keep pace in developmental practices and affluent life that people should have. Okay, when we look at this chapter, which is titled as A Great Leap in Political Thought, The Age of Enlightenment, we see that this chapter is written in a significant detail and explains, firstly, general features and origins of Enlightenment. Then it turns its attention to the great traditions within the Enlightenment period, which can be said that started at 18th century. Those traditions are that your chapter focused on are French Enlightenment, Scottish Enlightenment, and German Enlightenment traditions. After that, this chapter turns its attention to discuss on certain figures of the political thought. Although we can point out quite a number of different and quite influential philosophers when we look at the period of Enlightenment. In terms of political thought, three figures are quite important, who are Montesquieu, Alexis de Tocqueville, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And these discussions on the contributions of those great figures on political thought is the last important point that your chapter discusses on. Thank you.